Merry meet, I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and tonight I'm here to talk about the Witch's Pyramid. So, if you are here with me live, you can leave any questions or comments in the feed, and I will get to them at the end. Otherwise, I'm going to dive right in. But first, before I begin with the Witch's Pyramid, I'd like to talk a bit about the first quarter moon. So we are at this stage in the lunar cycle. The first quarter is taking place tomorrow, Thursday, December 29th at about 5:20 p.m. Pacific. So I guess that would be 8 p.m. Eastern. And this is a halfway point in the waxing half of the cycle. So this is a very unique spot where we can stop, we can assess what's going on in our own intentions, what's going on in our own energy in this individual cycle, and really see if where we're at is where we would like to move forward, or if there's something we'd like to adjust and make that change so we can move further into that waxing half with great and better optimal energy. So it's also a good time for us to pause and assess our balance as well. Transition points of any cycle, whether it's the solar or the lunar one, are ideal for this. So this could look like chakra balancing if you want to take this time to do some kind of a chakra balancing flow or chakra balancing meditation. Now would be a great time for that. Also a good time to just look at your life and see, is there something that you need to do less of, or is there something that you need to do more of? And really see if you can find some ideal balance at this point so you move further into the cycle with better and optimal energy. All right, so diving into the witch's pyramid. Now, the witch's pyramid is sometimes called the four pillars of witchcraft. It has several different names that I'll talk a little bit about the historical significance and where they come from. Essentially, what the witch's pyramid is a magical philosophy, and many feel that it truly is the foundation necessary for any practice of magic. Now, there are 4 points at the base of a pyramid, and so the name is very apt here. And each of these points in the witch's pyramid correspond to one of the four earthly elements. So you will see as I get a little further in, there's a little bit of disagreement as to which elements go with which points. And that also has to do with disagreement between points on the circle where the various elements also fall. Now, in some traditions, there is also a top of the pyramid that is added to represent the element of spirit, and we'll also talk about that in a bit. But before we get into what the pyramid means, it's important for us to look at where did it come from. So this magical philosophy really does precede our modern witchcraft. We're not really entirely sure how far back it goes, but it's first described in these terms in the 1800s by Eliphas Levy, who wrote in the book Transcendental Magic about the not the witch's pyramid, the four elements of the Sphinx. Okay, so here's what he said. He said, to attain the sanctum regnum, which in other words is the knowledge of the magi or the knowledge of the magician, there are four indispensable conditions. First, an intelligence illuminated by study. Second, an intrepidity that nothing can check. A will which cannot be broken. And finally, a prudence which nothing can corrupt and nothing can intoxicate. To know, to dare, to will, to keep silent, such are the four words of the magi, or sometimes translated to magician. So he then went on to say magic is the traditional science of the secrets of nature, which has been transmitted to us from the magi. Now, in order to be a successful magician, Levi believed that one must be like the magi, who would have adhered to these four principles, which he said were to know, to dare, to will, and to keep silent. So if you look back a little bit further at who the Magi were, of course, there's stories of the Magi in the Bible as well, but the Magi were Zoroastrian priests. And this suggests that these ideas that Levi was writing about actually predate him by who knows how long. Now, the interesting thing is a simple search of this, if you type in magi and witch's pyramid, or you type in magi and some of these words, you don't actually get a lot. So it is a little bit mysterious as to where the ideas came from. But at least from Levi's perspective, one interpretation is that the magician, or one who seeks to do some form of magic, should have this ability to know. So there's this element of knowledge here. So we can think of this as perhaps to know one's path of study, to know one's craft. Now, the magician also needs to be able to dare, to be fearless in whatever they are studying, to not really be afraid of what it could reveal. Sometimes when we dig down and we do magical practices, and especially those who are involved in a individualized, in-depth study of themselves, such as shadow work, you know that sometimes the things that are revealed are not always pleasant. So there's that idea of not being afraid of what we might see and not let that hinder us from going further into our magic and into our study. And this really does then require a great inner will and a great inner strength. This would be this idea of to will. And then Levi at least said to keep silent had to do with judgment, unhindered by outside forces. So, this idea that we don't need to have what we're doing validated by other people or other systems, it comes from within. Now, he equated these words with the Sphinx, as I mentioned earlier. He called them the four powers of the Sphinx. And then ceremonial magicians, a bit later, changed this into the four powers of the magician. Now, it's really not until about the 1950s that we ever see it recorded as the witch's pyramid. But after that point, we start to see some drawings as well with the elements put in, and the witch's pyramid it comes to be. So I wanted to hold up a picture here. I'm not a great artist, and I really couldn't find a book that had a good one. So here you can see the pyramid, and at the base we have to will, to dare, to keep silent, and to know. And then of course at the top you can see that I've added this fifth element, or this fifth idea, to go, which we're going to talk about as a later addition. Now, at the base of the pyramid, we have, let's start with to know. So this is usually one that we'll start with here. We have at the base to know. And in many cases, this is attributed to air. In fact, this is one that's really not usually disputed. We think of the air element as being related to our knowledge, our intelligence, our thoughts. So this makes a lot of sense here. And if you think about also the traditional way of drawing or casting a circle, we often will begin in the east. If we're calling elements, we will usually call air first. So it's a good place to start. Now, to be successful in our magic, we need to have some kind of intention. So this is one interpretation of what the to know means. So we need to have an intention clear in our mind. So after practicing magic for many years and leading a coven and watching, women in my coven practice magic and also center different rituals, I have noticed that when an intention can be quite specific, it seems to be better taken by the universe. So in this, I mean, we tend to see results that we were expecting more when the magic is more clear than when it's more vague. In general, that at that point, sometimes we see results that we were not really expecting or might be hard to interpret. So really having that idea clear in the mind can be important for any magician or any witch who's practicing magic. It's also becomes easier to really know your intention the closer that you get to your higher self, which is not always easy, but really should be a path that everyone is seeking to find. So really truly finding what we need, what our higher self wants, why we're here, what we're doing in this incarnation really should be the end goal of most magical practices, and does seem to be for most traditions. Now, the more that we understand that about ourselves, the more powerful our magic becomes, because that magic is more aligned with our higher purpose while here on this plane. Now, there is a second interpretation of to know, and this would have to do with gaining outside knowledge. So there are some that will probably not agree with me here. But there is a foundation that we have to learn. So whether we seek out teachers, whether we seek out books, we do have to find knowledge someplace. There are some people who come to witchcraft strictly from a traditional perspective, and in that way, most of their magic was handed down to them as well. So there's got to be knowledge coming from somewhere. But there are some who say, you do not need outside sources in order to truly become a witch. And I can see the perspective, though I tend to, as a teacher myself and someone who is very vested in my own, my own learning and my own knowledge, I feel that there is so much we can gain from learning from others, and learning from books. I don't know where I would be without all the knowledge I gained, in my late teens and early 20s and all those books I was devouring at the time. So let's move on to will. So to will is another one where the element is not disputed here, and it makes a lot of sense. So here we have to will at the bottom of the pyramid. So this is going to correspond to the element of fire, which makes sense when we're casting a circle or we're calling the elements, we tend to call fire next after air. So this is very important. It's important for a magician or a witch practicing magic to have a belief and conviction in what they are doing. So this is really where our self-doubt and our self-belief battle it out. So which one is it going to be? Are we going to have more self-belief? Or are we going to have more self-doubt? And that is going to color a particular spell, a particular magical working that we're trying to do at that time. Now, there's also this idea of will versus true will, which kind of goes back to that talk about the higher self. So we can have will. Will is just you doing something, you deciding to do something and you do it. But not everything that you do or decide to do is aligned with your true will, which is what's connected to your higher self. So the more we, again, anchor onto that higher self, the more it becomes easier to see if our will is aligned with our true will. So again, our magic is going to have more power to it if our will and our true will are the same thing. Now, here, what's interesting is we could probably talk about, I could have talked about this with to know as well, but if we really want to tap deeper into this aspect of the pyramid, we can look at the element of fire and we can look at the solar plexus as an energetic center where we can work with that element within our bodies. So that's another way of looking at the pyramid, is if you want to strengthen one of those legs of the pyramid or one of those parts of the foundation, you can work with that specific element. So with the idea of to know, obviously deepening your knowledge in some way of your craft or deepening your knowledge of yourself, and also working with the element of air and working with, I would say, the heart chakra there. Working with breath work perhaps too would be a way to strengthen that part of the foundation. Now there is let's go on to the third one then. Okay, so to dare. I keep having trouble with this. Microphone isn't attaching very well to my dress, so it feels like it's falling off. So here we have to dare. This is the third part of the foundation. Now here's where we sometimes have some disagreement about the elements that are connected here. So I've always felt that to dare connects with the water element. And I think that the majority of interpretations you see usually say that, though some people think it connects better to the earth element. I'm going to move forward with a water interpretation here, but if you feel, when you kind of hear what I'm going to say, if you feel it's more earth for you, again, the craft and your own path is all about you forging your own way, not just blindly following what other people say, but really listening. Does it work for you? Does it resonate for you, that interpretation? So here, when it comes to the idea of to dare, we have to do the magic. We have to have the daring to do the magic, and we also have to have the daring to be able to follow it up in the mundane world. So one of the principles of magic is that it's one step to put it out in a magical way, but it seems that the universe, the gods, the goddesses, whatever you want to look at this as, they seem to reward us better if we also follow up in the mundane world. So this could also mean making sure that before we perform magic, we've actually done what we can in the mundane world. And then once we do the magic, making sure that we follow up with it. Now, this is also us daring to go beyond our limitations. We know that what we're capable of magically is much greater than what most people think we we are capable of in the physical world. This transcends what we're capable of here in this plane, right? Because magic doesn't take place in this plane anyway. It takes place in the etheric world and then trickles down into this one. Now, we also have to have this daring spirit to really let go and to surrender into the universal energies once we've done our magic, once we've done our spell work, to really be able to let it go, send it out into the universe, and really dare to surrender that, which can be really hard. We want to have control, it's in our nature, but to really surrender and let it kind of go can be one of the hardest things and the most daring thing to do. Now, a second interpretation here, there's actually a couple more interpretations here, and a lot of these make sense, and they can all just be layers on top of each other as well. So we may also face discrimination depending on where we live, depending on who we have to be around in our lives. The witches of old actually faced physical violence and physical danger that fortunately most of us do not have to face today. I would say all of us probably, because thankfully there are no death penalties for witchcraft any longer. But still, it takes courage and bravery to be able to walk the old path. So whether we're facing that discrimination or not, to simply be able to walk a path that is not the one accepted by the mainstream, to kind of go against the flow, it takes daring and it takes courage and it takes bravery. Now that leads kind of nicely into the fourth part of the pyramid. So at the base, we also have to keep silent. So this one is most of the time thought of as connected to the element of earth, though if you were to connect to dare with the element of earth, then you'd probably switch these, and then to keep silent would be connected to water, which also can make sense, right? Now I'm going to move forward with an earth interpretation of this now, but just know if it resonates with you the other way, explore that. Now, one interpretation of to keep silent is to really be silent, grounded, and centered in our own energies. So when we are scattered, when we are distracted, when there's a lot going on around us, when there is things that pull us away from our magical and spiritual practices, magic can be impacted greatly. Okay, so part of this is to really have the discipline to be able to know when our magic is perhaps going to be impeded by our energies. If we can't really turn inward, we got to ask ourselves why, and we have to see if there's a way that we could. It can be hard when there's a lot going on around us, there's a lot of distractions. Many of us live with other people who might be in and out of the room, but this is where it becomes imperative to really find a silent space where you can ground and go inside and be silent with yourself. Now, our energies are going to be most optimal when we can do this. So just like the element of earth, that element where, we're going down into the soil, we're going down into the wisdom of the mother below us, to truly get down into the depths of our own inner sanctum. This is really what to be silent has to do with. Now, some will also interpret this to mean that we don't want to speak about our magic afterwards. And there can definitely be some positive outcomes of this, of taking this interpretation as well. Now, it could be left over from that older interpretation that there was danger that one could face by performing witchcraft or magic. But at the same time, we also do have to be silent in order to hear that inner voice. If there's too much chatter, that monkey mind going, which is more like the element of element of air, if that's too activated, it's going to be hard for us to really be able to turn and really find that centered place, right? So that's where bringing in that earth element can be very helpful here. Now, it also kind of suggests that perhaps meditation or something meditative, this doesn't mean that person has to sit and meditate all the time, but to find something meditative that allows your brain to kind of go on, find a flow state, could be important to a witch. Now, at the same time, there are some witches who will say it's important really to not broadcast what you're doing because other people's energy afterwards can also impact your intention. And this could be people's doubts, people's fears about what you've done. And so in a lot of ways, I think it's probably great to keep what you've done close to yourself and not broadcast it out, especially to people who you know are going to be unsupportive or you know are going to have negative energy that will impact it. At the same time, I really do believe that if you could develop your own energy and it's strong enough, I don't think that other people's fears and doubts get in your way unless they filter in and they affect your own fears and doubts. So this could be people may disagree with me here, because other people's energy does have great consequences. But if you can really develop your own energy so strongly, it's almost like you're impermeable to that other stuff. At the same time, I am one who it's one of those we don't really need to broadcast what we're doing afterwards necessarily, at least until we've seen the results of our spell work. Now, I do want to show you here, before I move on and start talking about the fifth element, I wanted to show you a second drawing. So this is like a different interpretation of how the pyramid looks. This one's more in 2D. And here you can see that these are laid out in the directions that we would typically call in a circle or call our elements in. So to know that element of air, to will, fire, to dare, water, and then finally to keep silent, earth. So I just wanted to show that different interpretation. All right, so moving on, let's talk about the fifth element of spirit. So as you can see in this first drawing of the pyramid, we actually have at the top, we have this idea of to go. Now this fifth element was definitely a later addition. Eliphas Levi did not have it in his original philosophy. But this is not as late of an addition as we sometimes think. It was actually Aleister Crowley who introduced the idea of to go not much longer after Eliphas Levi had done it. Maybe I actually don't know the date, so I'm not going to say, but it wasn't as late as we think. Now, it's true that this idea of the fifth element of spirit is usually not really added in to the four elements. It often was not used by ceremonial magicians. It seems to be more of a modern witchcraft addition. But just knowing that Aleister Crowley did have the idea of to go, then it makes sense that when we kind of join that top of the pyramid to the fifth element, those two come in together and make sense together. So we often will equate this as spirit, like I said, by modern witches. And it's really about putting your soul into the magic, into your magical workings. I like to think of this as putting both feet in. So I was once at a reading with someone on Zoom, and it was a woman who was known to be very intuitive, and she could kind of sit with you and she could give you messages. And one of the things she said to me was, you got 1 foot in, you've got 1 foot out. And this was about a different idea. It wasn't necessarily about magic, but it really resonated a lot with me, because how much of our lives do we do that? We straddle that line and we're kind of living with 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And a lot of it is that kind of fear of missing out. Maybe we're afraid of what's going on one side to really be able to pick, this one side and kind of go with it. But at the same time, I also think there's this sort of this fear, this mistrust in ourselves. Like what would happen if we really truly trusted our magic enough that we could put both feet in, right? Put both feet in. So really think about that when you're thinking about the element of spirit and that idea of to go, just going with it and really going all in. That's really my interpretation, I think resonates the most with me. It's not just talking the talk either. It's about making witchcraft and magic a lifestyle. And there's a lot of power in that. I did notice with my own self, I've taught for several decades. I've been at this for a long time. And there's been periods of my life where sometimes it's felt like I was just kind of going through the motions, just going day to day, and I would lead my circles, and I was always here for the people in my coven. But my own practice suffered, and I didn't really do very much. I wasn't really living the life for myself. But when I started doing that, and for me, that meant really following the lunar cycles and the solar cycles, and really making sure that I was always doing a practice on the dark moon and on the full moon, various things like that. I then really started to feel that element of spirit. So you might ask yourself, what does it take to really be all in and to really live that life and not just kind of like they say about the Christians, there's those two types of Christians, maybe there's more types, but there's at least that type who only goes to church on Easter and Christmas. We don't want to be those kind of witches. There's nothing wrong with it. But if we want to really optimize our energy and we really want to take our craft to the next level, it's not really something we can dabble in, right? We got to go all in. And, in some ways, too, we can sort of think about it as well as this element of spirit and this idea of to go supporting everything that's below it. Just like that element of spirit really supports all of the elements below. Some actually say it gives birth to the earthly elements. Just like that, this idea of to go in the top of the pyramid supporting what's beneath it. Now, sometimes you'll also see people draw this as a pentagram as well. So here I wanted to do that, and it's probably going to be mirrored because of the camera, but at least you can see to go at the very top. And here we have, again, to know equated with earth, to dare with water, to will with fire, and then to keep silent, earth. I think I said to know. Did I say earth? It should be air. Sorry. To know is air, and then to keep silent is earth. So there's another way to kind of draw that out. And you can always draw these, put them in your book of shadows, in your journal, and then just think about it, interpret what does it mean for you, because that's, really the next step here. So when working with your magical abilities, you really want to think about your own interpretation. So how can you use the witch's pyramid in order to optimize your energy and really get you in a path that you want to be in with your magic? So, you want to think about what areas of the pyramid do you feel that you're really strong in, as opposed to which areas do you think you need some more work. And then at the end of all of this, which is why it is a great time to be talking about this on the first quarter moon, where we're trying to strive for balance, really seeing if we can achieve balance in the elements and in our chakras, and this witch's pyramid is one way to do it. All right, so I am going to end there. And if anybody has any questions about the witch's pyramid, you can always drop them in here. Actually, before I end, let me say one more thing about it too, because I kind of started talking about it with the first two, and I don't think I followed up with the others. But as I mentioned, you can look at these interpretations. This it's a philosophical way of looking at, how to strengthen your magical practice, but I think there's so much power within it because of the connections to the elements as well. So you can work with those different elements. So if you feel that perhaps you say the daring part is not quite as strong as you would like it to be for you, you can work with what does it mean to be more daring? What would it mean to put yourself out there more? What does it mean for you? But you can also think about working with that element of water, and you can also think about working with the sacral chakra. So different ways to interpret it. All right, so I am going to sign off. I hope that everyone enjoyed learning about the witch's pyramid. If you have any questions, get a hold of me afterwards. And until next time, blessed be.